The year was 1420, and the city of Florence was a beehive of activity. But amidst the bustling streets and the grandeur of the cathedral, a quiet and unassuming man named Giovanni di Bicci, I de Medici, was planning a significant change. His partner, Benedetto de Bardi, had recently passed away, and this event provided Giovanni with the perfect opportunity to reorganize his banking empire. Giovanni, now 60 years old, decided it was time to step back from the day-to-day operations. He appointed his sons, Cosimo and Lorenzo, to take over the business. The bank's new capital was set at 24,000 florins, with 16,000 provided by the Medici brothers and 8,000 by a member of the Bardi family. Giovanni would stay involved, but only behind the scenes, offering advice and guidance. Giovanni lived in a modest house on the Pisa, just a short walk from the bank's headquarters. Unlike the other wealthy families in Florence, who paraded through the streets with their retinues, Giovanni preferred to walk alone, accompanied only by his personal servant. He maintained a humble lifestyle, both because of his temperament and for political reasons. One of Giovanni's major projects was the Ospedale degli Innocenti, a foundling home for abandoned children. He was part of the public committee that commissioned its construction in 1419. 2 years later, he and 7 other families funded the rebuilding of the church of San Lorenzo, which had been damaged by fire in 1417. These acts of patronage were not just about charity. They were a way for the Medici to gain social and political status. The architect chosen for these projects was Filippo Brunelleschi, a brilliant but temperamental man known for his abrasive personality. Despite this, Brunelleschi was a pioneer of the Renaissance, rediscovering the rules of perspective and designing the portico of the Ospedale degli Innocenti, which is considered the first piece of Renaissance architecture. The clean, classical lines of his designs reflected the architectural style of ancient Rome, and the columns were not just decorative, but structurally essential. However, Giovanni's life was not just about art and architecture. Italian politics were as turbulent as ever. In 1422, Milan's Duke, Filippo Maria Visconti, signed a peace treaty with Florence, only to break it by occupying the town of Forli. The Florentine nobility called for war, but the people, supported by the Medici, favored moderation. Despite this, the ruling government voted for war, and Giovanni patriotically supported the decision, assisting in the military preparations. The war went poorly for Florence. Milan made significant gains over the next 3 years, but the tide turned when Venice joined the conflict on Florence's side in 1425. The war dragged on for 2 more years until Visconti was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty in 1427. Florence now faced a massive debt from the war, equivalent to 4,200,000 florins. The old tax system, called the estimo, was based on income and was often used to punish political enemies. To raise the necessary funds, a new tax system, the catasto, was introduced. This system taxed a citizen's entire wealth, including land and other assets, and was more difficult to evade. Giovanni, now 67, initially had reservations about the catasto, but soon became one of its strongest supporters. His backing helped the new tax system gain public acceptance, and he was seen as a selfless advocate for the people. In 1428, Giovanni fell ill. He knew his time was near and summoned his sons, Cosimo and Lorenzo, to his bedside. According to legend, he gave them advice that would shape the Medici's future. Never hang around the Palazzo della Signoria, only go there when summoned. Keep out of the public gaze and never go against the will of the people unless they are advocating a disastrous project. Giovanni's final request was for a simple, quiet funeral, but the people of Florence, recognizing his contributions, demanded a grand procession. Cosimo, understanding the public sentiment, agreed. Funeral procession was a grand affair, with Giovanni's body carried through the streets in an open coffin, followed by a long line of Medici family members, foreign ambassadors, and representatives of the city's guild. As the procession wound through the streets, it was clear to all that the Medici had arrived. Cosimo, now at the helm of the family, was about to rise to new heights of power and influence, but little did anyone know the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead would shape the destiny of Florence and the Medici family for generations to come. Cosimo de' Medici's life was a mix of business, politics, and personal drama. After the Council of Constance, where he had fled to avoid political trouble, different stories emerged about what happened next. Some say he returned straight to Florence, where he served on the city's ruling council. Others claim he went on a long journey through northern Europe, visiting financial centers like Geneva, Lyons, and Avignon. This trip, if it happened, would have been a chance for Cosimo to check on the Medici's business contacts and look for new opportunities. It's likely that he also visited Bruges, a major trading hub in Flanders, which was crucial for the wool trade and connected Europe from England to Italy and beyond. During this time, Cosimo started collecting rare manuscripts, a hobby that would become a passion. His careful instructions to his agents about buying these books show how deeply he understood the market. The truth might be that Cosimo first returned to Florence and then made shorter trips to northern Europe. In 1416, Cosimo married Contessina de' Bardi, a young woman from a once rich but now less affluent banking family. The marriage was arranged by his father Giovanni, and it marked a step up in social status for the Medici. Contessina's dowry included the Palazzo Bardi, an old and somewhat run-down family home. Cosimo immediately began renovating it, decorating the outside with the Medici family crest, which featured the famous pal or balls. The number of pal on the crest varied, but by this time it usually had 6. Cosimo and Contessina had their first child, a son named Piero, within 2 years. By then, Cosimo was often away on business. In 1418, his father appointed him as the manager of the Medici Bank's branch in Rome, which was still very profitable despite losing the papal account to the Spini family. While in Rome, Cosimo bought a young slave girl named Maddalena, who later gave birth to his illegitimate son Carlo. Carlo was raised with Cosimo's other children and was destined for the priesthood, a common practice for illegitimate offspring. Contessina, known for her jolly personality and love of food, managed the Medici's country estates and the family's haberdashery business. Her letters show that she was deeply involved in the family's affairs and cared for Cosimo during his absences. Despite the challenges, their relationship seemed supportive and close. In 1420, when Giovanni retired, he passed the bank to his sons with Cosimo in charge. Cosimo's leadership was soon evident, and he helped secure the Medici's role as papal bankers again when the Spini family went bankrupt. By 1428, Cosimo was the head of the family and a key political figure in Florence. He decided to build a new palazzo on Via Larga, hiring the famous architect Brunelleschi to design it. However, Cosimo rejected Brunelleschi's grand plan, opting for a more modest design by Michelozzo. Inside, though, the palazzo was lavish, with a bronze statue of David by Donatello in the courtyard. This statue, a symbol of Florence's values, also hinted at Cosimo's support for the common people and his artistry. Donatello, a close friend of Cosimo, produced many works for him, including a bronze head of Contessina. Donatello's art, known for its realism and emotional depth, influenced Cosimo's taste and the broader Renaissance movement. Cosimo's patronage extended to scholars and humanists, including the monk Ambrogio Traversari, who translated ancient manuscripts for him. These intellectuals helped shape the new humanist ideas that were gaining ground in Florence. However, not everyone was pleased with the new humanism. Rinaldo degli Albizzi, a leader of the old oligarchy, saw it as a threat and tried to undermine Cosimo's influence. The old families resented the new tax system, the catasto, which Cosimo's father had introduced. Their efforts to make it unpopular led to unrest, including a rebellion in Volterra that had to be suppressed. Cosimo's rise to power was marked by shrewd political moves and a deep appreciation for art and learning. His relationships, both personal and professional, shaped the direction of the Medici family and the city of Florence. Despite the challenges, Cosimo's leadership and vision laid the foundation for the Medici's enduring legacy. The tensions in Florence were reaching a boiling point. The city, exhausted by the costly war against Lucca, was now on the brink of internal conflict. The ruling families, led by Rinaldo degli Albizzi, had grown increasingly resentful of the Medici, particularly Cosimo de' Medici. Despite Cosimo's deep reservations about the war, he had been forced to join the Committee of 10, the council overseeing the conflict. His cousin Averardo, more impulsive, took command of the troops in Pisa. The Medici were now fully committed to the war, whether they liked it or not. In 1430, the Florentine army, led by Rinaldo degli Albizzi, marched toward Lucca. Lucca, feeling threatened, sought help from Milan. The Milanese ruler sent Francesco Sforza, a skilled mercenary commander, to defend the city. The Florentines, already struggling, faced a new challenge. Sforza's battle-hardened troops forced the Florentine army to retreat. Sforza then marched into Lucca, deposed the ruling tyrant, and set up a republican government. This left Florence in a difficult position, as they now had less reason to attack a city that was already a republic. The Committee of Ten was in disarray, and the ruling signoria was indecisive. In a desperate move, they bribed Sforza with 50,000 florins to leave Lucca. Cosimo, known for his financial prudence, was horrified by this decision, considering it a waste of money. Averardo, however, supported the move. The Florentine army returned to Lucca and resumed the siege, but it was ineffective. The citizens of Lucca, now more determined, defended their city with renewed vigor. Rinaldo degli Albizzi, determined to regain control, concocted a plan involving the great architect Brunelleschi and other artists. They were to dam the river Serchio and flood the city. The plan seemed brilliant, but the commander of the Lucca garrison had his own ideas. Under the cover of night, he destroyed the dam, causing a flood that washed away the Florentine camp. The news of this disaster reached Florence, and Cosimo, disgusted, resigned from the Committee of Ten and left for Verona. He did not want to be associated with the war's failures. Rinaldo saw his chance to eliminate the Medici. He began spreading rumors that the Medici were plotting to take over the city and establish a tyranny. He needed the support of Niccolò da Uzzano, a respected elder statesman. However, Niccolò was skeptical of Rinaldo's claims and knew that the Albizzi had their own plans for power. Without Niccolò's backing, Rinaldo's plans stalled. But a year later, Niccolò died, and the city fell into further disarray. The exchequer was empty, and the city was drowning in debt. Cosimo returned to Florence, and despite the risks, instructed the Medici Bank to loan the city enough to cover its most pressing debts. This move made him popular with the citizens, who were tired of high taxes, but it also fueled the oligarchy's suspicions. The streets were filled with tension. Rumors of plots and counterplots spread, and the powerful families fortified their palazzi. The Medici residence was daubed with blood, a chilling warning. Cosimo, sensing the danger, moved to the family estate in the Mugello, choosing a small, fortified villa called Il Tribio. With Cosimo out of the way, Rinaldo manipulated the elections. The new gonfaloniere, Bernardo Guadagni, and 7 of the 9 new Signoria members were Albizzi supporters. The Signoria had the power to ruin anyone, and Cosimo was running out of options, but he was not idle. He secretly transferred vast sums of money from the Medici Bank in Florence to branches in Rome and Venice. He also hid gold in monasteries, ensuring his wealth, and the bank's reputation would remain intact. In September 1433, the new Signoria ordered Cosimo to return to Florence. Despite warnings from friends, he went to the Palazzo della Signoria. He confronted the new leaders about the rumors of a plot against him, but they denied it. 3 days later, on September 7th, Cosimo returned to the palazzo. Instead of a meeting, he was led to the top of the tower and locked in a small cell. The city was in chaos. Rinaldo's son and his followers occupied the piazza to prevent any rescue attempts. Inside the palazzo, the Signoria was in a panic. They charged Cosimo with attempting to become a tyrant, a serious crime that could mean death. The evidence. The palazzo he was building on the Via Larga, which they claimed was too grand for an ordinary citizen. The stage was set for a pivotal moment in Florence's history. The fate of Cosimo de' Medici and the future of the Medici family now hung in the balance. Cosimo de' Medici's fate hung in the balance as the Signoria, the ruling council of Florence, deliberated his punishment. The tension was thick, and Cosimo, locked in his cell, could only imagine the worst. He had heard the clamor of armed men in the piazza below, and feared for his life. When the jailer finally opened the cell door to read the sentence, Cosimo fainted from the shock. His brother Lorenzo and cousin Averardo, hearing the news, quickly fled to their estates in the Mugello and Pisa to avoid capture. Meanwhile, Cosimo's friend, Niccolò da Tolentino, a captain of the Florentine army, prepared his mercenaries to march on Florence if needed. But they hesitated, fearing that any move might lead to Cosimo's execution. In the city, Rinaldo degli Albizzi, Cosimo's primary enemy, was determined to see him dead. He had the Signoria call a Parlamento, a meeting of citizens to vote on Cosimo's fate. However, Rinaldo's men controlled the Paese, allowing only a few supporters to enter. The Parlamento voted to set up a Balia, a committee of 200 citizens, to decide Cosimo's future. Cosimo, still in his cell, was terrified. He barely ate, fearing his food might be poisoned. His jailer, Federico Malavolti, noticed his fear and reassured him, promising to share his meals. This kindness gave Cosimo some comfort, and he began to regain his composure. Cosimo passed a note to a friend, Il Farnagexio, asking him to send money to the Gonfaloniere heir, Guadagni, to secure his support. Il Farnagexio, a known character in Florence, delivered the bribe as instructed. Meanwhile, the Balia met, and despite Rinaldo's pressure, voted to banish Cosimo for 10 years instead of executing him. Rinaldo, frustrated by this outcome, took matters into his own hands. He had Cosimo's supporters rounded up and tortured, including the humanist poet Niccolò Tanucci, who was forced to confess to treason. This confession was a serious charge, and Rinaldo saw it as a way to demand Cosimo's death. However, news of Cosimo's arrest had reached beyond Florence. The rulers of Ferrara, Venice, and even the Pope, who owed Cosimo favors, sent envoys to Florence to demand his release. The Gonfaloniere, now bribed by Cosimo, and other members of the Signoria, also influenced by bribes, began to waver. Rinaldo, realizing his support was slipping, acted quickly. On 28 September, the Signoria met again and decided to banish Cosimo to Padua for 10 years, along with other Medici family members to different cities. The Medici were also barred from holding any public office in Florence. On 3 October, Cosimo was led from his cell to face the Signoria. Despite conflicting accounts, he seems to have accepted his sentence with a mix of resignation and a warning. He pleaded for his life, cautioning the Signoria against the chaos that would ensue if he were killed. The Signoria, fearing the consequences, decided to protect Cosimo from Rinaldo's supporters as he was escorted out of the city. Under the cover of darkness, Cosimo was taken through the streets and out of Florence. He rode into exile, leaving behind a city he had once controlled. The Medici were out and the Albizzi were in, but the power dynamics of Florence had been forever altered. Rinaldo struggled to rule without Cosimo's financial support, and the Medici supporters continued to plot their return. Cosimo's exile marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him but for the entire city of Florence. The Medici might have been banished, but their influence and the seeds of their eventual return were already sown. Cosimo de' Medici's journey from exile back to the heart of Florence was nothing short of a miraculous turn of events. When he was banished, it seemed like the end of his influence and power. Yet, just a few months later, he returned not just as a respected citizen, but as the de facto ruler of the city, all while maintaining the appearance of a humble and loyal Florentine. During his time in Venice, Cosimo had stayed at the monastery of San Giorgio Maggiore, where he had commissioned a new library from his favorite architect, Michelozzo, in gratitude to Pope Eugenius IV for his earlier efforts to save him. This act of kindness and his generous patronage of the arts and architecture would become a hallmark of his rule. Cosimo's return was met with overwhelming joy and support from the people of Florence. The city had grown tired of the turmoil and political machinations that had led to his banishment. His loyal friends Michelozzo and Donatello had followed him into exile, showing the depth of their commitment. When the Signoria, the city's governing body, invited him back, it was clear that the tide had turned in his favor. The return was a triumphal procession, with crowds lining the streets to cheer him on. But Cosimo, ever the strategist, entered the city under the cover of darkness, accompanied by his brother Lorenzo and a high-ranking official. He was given a room in the Palazzo della Signoria for the night, a symbol of his restored status. The next morning, Cosimo paid a visit to Pope Eugenius IV, thanking him for his support and reaffirming their friendship. As he made his way home to the Palazzo Bardi, the crowds were even more jubilant, treating him like a returning hero. Despite the public acclaim, Cosimo was careful not to appear too powerful or overbearing. He remembered his father's advice to avoid being too conspicuous and the importance of maintaining the facade of Florentine republicanism. He would rule, but not openly. This subtle approach allowed him to wield influence without arousing jealousy or resentment. The oligarchy families who had opposed him, including the Albizzi, were swiftly dealt with. Rinaldo degli Albizzi and his supporters were banished from the city, and even Palestrozzi, who had helped secure Cosimo's return, was exiled for 10 years. Cosimo's actions were decisive, ensuring that there would be no organized opposition to his rule. Cosimo's leadership brought a period of stability and prosperity to Florence. He set a public example by being the highest taxpayer in the city, though his actual wealth was far greater than what he declared. His covert control over the tax system allowed him to eliminate any opposition by overtaxing them into ruin or forcing them into exile. The Medici party, loyal to him, took over the abandoned estates, solidifying their power. Cosimo's rule was marked by his support for the arts and humanities, which flourished under his patronage. He commissioned buildings, supported artists, and fostered a culture of learning and innovation. His legacy was one of peace and cultural renaissance, and Florence thrived under his guidance. In the end, Cosimo de' Medici had not only returned from exile, but had become the true ruler of Florence, all while maintaining the illusion of a humble citizen. His wisdom and strategic thinking ensured that his name would be remembered as one of the greatest leaders in the city's history.